The word on the street is that Sony has a PlayStation 5 Pro announcement due at any minute, especially coming next week. And adding fuel to the fire, even Sony has started to tease its upcoming console with some of their marketing material for their 30 years of PlayStation. So this begs the question, why should we buy the new console? What improvements should we expect from the new king of consoles? Let's play some games. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a good one. Man, it has been several months since my last video, and if you haven't already read my pinned tweet over on Twitter, definitely check that out because it explains just why I haven't been able to cover content as much here on the channel. But here on the channel, I like to talk about all things tech that drives my passion, gaming. With more action in the console wars than ever, I find it my duty to explain some of these different talking points. Case in point, the power of the PlayStation 5 Pro. But before we get into that though, I've got some disclosures I gotta put forward. Nothing that I'm going to say today reflects my employer's thoughts, opinions, or results. I'm not going to be confirming or denying any of the leaks that are on the internet, and any results that I show are not conclusive of an official statement. With that said though, let's talk about the PlayStation 5 Pro. If you believe the leaks, some impressive performance improvements are coming down the pipe. Allegedly, there's a 45% improvement in raw rasterization performance. On top of that, thanks to the new PlayStation Super Resolution, or PSSR, the Pro will have access to hardware-based upscaling, similar to NVIDIA's DLSS technology. With the upgraded GPU components, it's also alleged that we'll see a 2 times performance improvement in ray tracing. Now, the TLDR there, we get more horsepower and better upscaling technology, so that's a definite win, right? Well, as always, the tricky part is how all of these improvements translate into a functioning game. Over these past couple months, I have been reflecting over the specs, and I see 4 different scenarios for the PlayStation 5 Pro improvement. First, the raw horsepower alone will improve the gaming experience. We'll see resolution scaling happening less often, frame rates are going to be more consistent, and older games are just going to run at their near native resolutions. The second, the extra horsepower and improved upscaler will make games look even better. Now, resolution scaling works by taking a lower rendered frame and increasing its resolution through an algorithm. With the PlayStation 5, we see lower resolutions around 1080p up to 1440p. But with the Pro and that extra horsepower, it should improve to about 1440p and maybe even up to 1800p. Then the enhanced upscale coming from AMD's FSR to the PSSR we mentioned before, it's going to improve the overall clarity of the frame. These two things will have a compounding improvement compared to the base console. Now the third scenario, since we have a better upscaler, games could use a lower render resolution and increased horsepower to achieve remarkably good frame rates. Even though there are some 120 FPS modes on the base PlayStation 5, this might enable opportunities for even more games to offer the feature. Last, Digital Foundry alluded to it in their latest podcast.
Best case scenario, it's as good as DLSS. Could even be slightly better, who knows? But, in that scenario, with the Pro, you could actually be running at lower resolutions internally than the base PlayStation 5 version and actually come up with a much better looking presentation at the end. Extra horsepower for ray tracing, extra horsepower for better performance. So, it could be a game changer.
To sum up Rich here, this is very similar to the increased frame rate point from before, except we're going to substitute frame rate for adding more quality settings and even ray tracing for an even better looking game. At least, that's the theory. So in typical Turk fashion, I want to walk you guys through each of these scenarios and show y'all some gameplay clips from about 11 different games to put that theory into practice. Let's whet our palate and start with some simple looks at just the raw horsepower improvements. The leaks suggest we should see about a 45% improvement in raw frame rate. Now, this can manifest in 2 different ways. We could effectively bump a 40 FPS game up to 60 FPS, or a 1080p game up to 1440p. So I've got 3 different games that reflect this situation: The Last of Us Part 1, Doom Eternal, and the new hotness, Space Marine 2. For The Last of Us Part 1, the game targets high quality settings And in its quality mode, it targets a stable 30 FPS at a native 4K resolution. With the extra power from the Pro, I don't see why Naughty Dog wouldn't just unblock performance and give us a native 4K 60 in this title. Now, we all know the PC port is already poorly optimized, so I don't see any reason why this landmark title for PlayStation can't finally deliver that coveted 4K 60 trophy. Next is Doom Eternal. On the base console, its software is already creating a fine-tuned ultra-quality preset with 4K display resolution and 60 FPS in their balanced mode. So let's grab the quad damage upgrade with the PlayStation 5 Pro, and you can expect this mode to be the default 120Hz mode now, running native 4K at frame rates up to 120 FPS. Now that's a massive improvement from the dynamic 1800p the previous 120Hz mode saw on the base consoles. How about we look at a more recent title with Space Marine 2? We have yet to see Digital Foundry's full breakdown, but early videos do show that the performance mode can range anywhere from 960p to 1080p. On PC, I can dial in the medium preset with my PlayStation 5 Pro analog GPU, and the game is rock solid at a base of 1440p. Though it might not be a massive win from a gamer's perspective, this helps improve the baseline performance of many of the modern titles we've seen, especially those built on Unreal Engine 5, and it's going to help keep the 9th generation consoles more relevant for quite some time. Space Marine 2 is a prime launching point into the second scenario. We now have more horsepower to run our game, so why don't we make it look much better with the same frame rate but the higher resolution? We can expect this because upscalers do a better job when running from a larger base image, meaning that an upscaled 1440p image will look better than a 1080p image. The coupling of the improved upscaler coming from AMD's FSR to Sony's proprietary PSSR should be more evident. Now, we don't know how well PSSR works, but I'm going to be substituting it with NVIDIA's DLSS just for our purposes today. According to the guys over at Digital Foundry, as we showed in the clip earlier, its quality is a good analog for our purpose. Now let's start with the graphical flagship of the generation, Cyberpunk 2077. On the left, we have 1080p upscaled to 4K with FSR, and on the right, we have 1440p upscaled to 4K with DLSS. Overall, the image looks really similar, but if you look closely at 1440p, it looks a lot sharper and it has fewer artifacts and ghosting from the finer details of the scene. You can really see it in the windows, the fences, and any of the vertical or horizontal lines you see across the scene. At least to my eye though, this improvement is a lot harder to see than what I was hoping for. How about a current Xbox exclusive with Hellblade 2? Arguably, people see it coming to PlayStation. I don't want to get into that. You can follow me on Twitter for those kind of convos. But for our purposes today, it'll help illustrate the point. This game's reviews were plagued by its 30 FPS limitation, but I'm going to deviate from what the console delivers just for illustration. At 1080p in this clip, we can hit 60 FPS, but thanks to Unreal's TSR technology, there are some really obvious fizzle and shimmering in the grass. But if we embrace the horsepower and AI upscaling similar to DLSS, the fizzle does disappear, and the overall image does look a bit clearer. But beyond the finer details, the scene's impact just isn't as obvious. Black Myth Wukong is a similar story to Space Marine 2, but I think it's a bit more pronounced. On console, Wukong runs around 1080p with FSR 3 and arguably, debatably, looks pretty good. But using 1440p with an AI upscaler, it looks a lot sharper to me. It's especially noticeable in the pagoda roof, the resolution of the finer textures, and of course in the foliage. But again, it's a marginal improvement, especially when in this game we're actively dodging mechanics and your screen is flooded with either the cloud effects or those particle effects. Why don't we continue to ramp up the pace and play some Call of Duty? Again, 1080p, it could look a little bit better. It's at least serviceable for most players, and it maintains an 80-ish FPS throughout the multiplayer benchmark. But if we bump up to 1440p, it increases the sharpness. But unless you're lining up a distant shot with your DMR, it's really hard to stop and smell the details when those hackers and zoomers are nuking you. So rather than looking good while getting fragged by the zoomers at 60 FPS, why not lower our resolution and hit 120 FPS? Call of Duty already has a 120Hz performance mode, so it'll be a more stable 120 FPS by default. However, what other kinds of games could benefit from this feature? Now, I've alluded to it in a couple of other videos. You can check them out at the link at the top right, but I think a racing game would look really good. Now, I don't have access to Gran Turismo on PC, but what game would look good at 120 FPS? Forza Horizon 5. The standard performance mode runs effectively 1800p at 60 FPS, so why don't we drop the resolution down to 1080p and use AI upscaling to make it look almost just as good? And sure enough, that 45% performance improvement easily bumps the game above 100 FPS. Of course, the clips you see right now don't really visualize the improved fluidity. Still, the more important takeaway is the minimal reduction in quality. Simply put, these fast-paced games clearly benefit from 120 FPS over visual quality. Another game that comes to mind with the improved fluidity would be Cyberpunk. Dropping the internal resolution down to performance mode from balanced is almost enough to maintain 100 FPS with the exact same quality settings as the previous performance mode. As we all know, this game is heavy in the city, but as we cruise into the more open spaces, it simply hits that FPS cap. More important though is the quality. It's more challenging to distinguish the quality drop with reduced resolution in the faster scenarios. However, in the slower instances, such as walking the streets when you're in dialogue or those sort of things, Sony's PlayStation Super Resolution, it just has more time and opportunity to make it look clearer than the FSR in its current form. Now, it's time to put Digital Foundry on notice. Let's replay the clip from before.
Best case scenario, it's as good as DLSS. Could even be slightly better, who knows? But, in that scenario, with the Pro, you could actually be running at lower resolutions internally than the base PlayStation 5 version and actually come up with a much better looking presentation at the end. Extra horsepower for ray tracing, extra horsepower for better performance. So, it could be a game changer.
Can we improve the quality by lowering our render resolution and leaning into PSSR? Let's start with the tip of the spear regarding RT on consoles, Remedy's Control. The good part here is that, by default, Control renders at 1440p and it uses many low-quality settings, and it uses a custom mix of RT reflections. By dialing back to 1080p and engaging the AI upscaling, we can turn on RT diffuse lighting, shadows, and debris, and this is equivalent to the high ray tracing preset. In fact, we still have enough gas in the tank to bump up quality settings to a mix of medium and high. However, can you see the difference? Sure, reflections are more reflective, particles are more particulate, and shadows are more shadowy? Whatever. At least to me, I don't see that as much of an improvement. Now, we got to go back to Cyberpunk 2077. I hope you're not tired of it, because we've got to discuss its RT mode. On console, it shoots for 1440p and 30 FPS while only using RT shadows. Now, right out of the gate, we can easily hit 60 FPS at the same settings, just from the performance improvement of the console. So that's already a vast improvement. But can we bump it up even further? Dialing back to 1080p internal resolution buys us all of the RT reflections and all the RT shadows, but unfortunately, not the lighting. We still maintain 60 FPS, so I could see that this is a place where CDPR could either stick with the 60 FPS we see here, or drop the frame rate back to 30 and turn on the RT lighting effects. That would be a huge step forward for console. Cyberpunk was built for ray tracing, and the addition really brings the atmosphere to life. The fact that we can get 60 FPS in this mode is a huge step forward. Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition is another major release that showcases the integration of ray tracing. This game is also purpose-built from the ground up for RT, and consoles run with the high RT preset by default. Doing the same song and dance, we only have to drop the res to 1296p, and we can bump it up to the Ultra Ray Tracing preset. Now, unlike Cyberpunk, the lights and reflections of RT aren't as noticeable with Metro Exodus, but its use of ray-traced global illumination creates incredibly realistic environments, which are imperative for the storytelling of this game. Last up is Witcher 3. I know it's an old game, but it has received a lot of love from CDPR, and its latest next-gen patch unlocks several impressive RT features. Now, of course, the PlayStation 5 Pro is going to easily run this game with console equivalent settings, but we want something extra from the Pro. Resolutions? Check. Shadows? Check. Ambient occlusion? Check. Global illumination? Check. We've got the whole slate of RT effects. At first glance, the lighting looks incredibly vivid, and the shadows have much more dynamic range than before. But again, we're comparing it against a non-ray traced game at that point. But compared to the latest improvements available on the PlayStation 5, the extra eye candy might just be enough. So suppose a game already has a ray traced enabled mode. In that case, turning on extra features might not be impactful enough to justify the upgrade. But upgrading from a performance mode to a performance RT mode might just be enough to get people to buy in. The PlayStation 5 Pro's potential improvements look impressive on paper, but after watching many of these gameplay clips, I think the story isn't as cut and dry as many might have hoped. The most impressive improvements manifest in the form of higher frame rates and more stable dynamic resolution scaling across the clips. Now, I've talked to a lot of gamers, be it on Twitter, at QuakeCon, DreamHack, different LAN parties, and the vast majority of you guys favor the increased frame rates over the improved resolutions and even quality. However, not all games need 120 FPS modes, and games that already do, like Gran Turismo, Call of Duty, Fortnite, and other popular titles, they already have the mode. And of course, 120 Hz are still pretty niche, so that might not make sense for all titles. Outside of future-proofing yourself with a Pro model, the improved resolutions or the improved RT and quality effects, I just don't think they're as noticeable to the average gamer. Sure, you could pause it and zoom in a lot or look at some screenshots, but that's not the way that I play my games. I think putting effects to the side, the central saving grace for the PlayStation Pro in this regards is switching over to PSSR, as long as the performance is equivalent to DLSS. And that's all I got to say about the PS5 Pro. Let me know down below what you are looking forward to from the upcoming console. Now, if there are any other topics that you want me to cover, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get to it. But guys, that's all I've got to say today. I hope you have a good one.